I never thought I'd be here. Not in a million years. Sitting alone on our bed, staring at the empty space where he used to lie. The silence is suffocating. My heart pounds so hard in my chest that it hurts, physically hurts. My breathing is shallow, and my mind can't grasp it. Can't comprehend the truth that I've just uncovered. I should have known. Maybe I did know. All those little signs that I pushed aside, convincing myself that I was overreacting, that I was being paranoid. The late nights at work, the sudden interest in his appearance, the way his phone was always just out of reach when I walked into the room. I should have known. But not this. Not with her. Lauren, my best friend, my sister in all but blood. The woman who has been by my side for years, through everything. Every triumph, every heartbreak, every insecurity. She was the one I trusted most, the one who was supposed to have my back, my confidant. And she slept with him, my husband. I feel the scream building in my throat, but I can't let it out. It's trapped inside me, along with every ounce of betrayal, every shred of disbelief that has taken over my body. I want to throw things, break everything in this room that was meant to be ours. Our sanctuary, the place where we loved, laughed, built our life together. But it's all a lie now. Every single memory poisoned by the knowledge that while I was busy trusting them both, they were busy tearing my world apart behind my back. It started with a message. A single message. I didn't even mean to see it. I was at Lauren's apartment last week, having one of our usual Friday night wine and gossip sessions. We laughed and shared stories like we always did, and when I left, I felt lighter. I thought about how lucky I was to have such an amazing friend, someone who knew me better than I knew myself sometimes. Her phone buzzed as I stood up to grab my coat. I glanced down at the screen out of habit, just a reflex. And there it was. Miss you. Wish you were here. It was his name that flashed across her phone. For a moment, I froze. My brain didn't immediately register what I'd just seen, like it was some sort of mistake, like my eyes were playing tricks on me. But then Lauren's quick, nervous motion as she snatched her phone off the table told me everything I needed to know. I asked her about it. Of course I did, but she brushed it off, saying it was a joke, that he must have sent it to the wrong person by mistake. I wanted to believe her so badly that I didn't push any further that night. I gave her an out, just like I'd been giving him one for months now. But I couldn't let it go. I couldn't stop thinking about that message. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked his phone while he was in the shower. I didn't want to be that wife, the one who snoops because she's too insecure to trust her husband. But after everything, after that message, I had to know. I couldn't live with the uncertainty gnawing at me. That's when I saw them. The pictures, the texts, all the late-night rendezvous when I thought he was working overtime or catching up with friends. Every excuse lined up so perfectly, like puzzle pieces I'd refused to assemble until it was too late. I confronted him as soon as he came out of the bathroom. I was shaking, holding his phone in my hand, and he looked at me with this confusion on his face, like he had no idea what I'd just seen. How long has this been going on? I remember my voice was shaking, the words barely making it out of my mouth. He didn't say anything at first, but I could see it in his eyes. The guilt, the panic, and then he dropped his head, running his hands through his hair like he was the victim in all of this. Like he was the one suffering. It's not what you think, he started, but I cut him off. How long? That's when he told me. 6 months. 6 months of lies. Of coming home to me after being with her. Of sleeping next to me, pretending like everything was fine while he was sneaking off to be with her. My best friend. My sister. The betrayal was overwhelming. My knees went weak, and I remember sinking to the floor as tears blurred my vision. I wanted to scream, to hit him, to make him feel the kind of pain that was ripping through me, but all I could do was cry. The walls of our life together came crashing down around me, and there was no way to fix it, no way to go back to how things were before. I told him to leave. I couldn't stand the sight of him, the smell of him. Everything about him was tainted. He tried to explain, to justify, but I wasn't listening. Nothing he could say would change the fact that he'd broken me in the worst possible way. He'd taken everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about my friendship with Lauren, and shattered it beyond repair. Now, as I sit here alone in the aftermath, I don't know how to move forward. How do you heal from something like this? How do you learn to trust again when the two people you loved most betrayed you in the deepest way possible? I want to hate them. I should hate them. But there's this ache in my chest that won't go away. This emptiness that feels like it's consuming me from the inside out. I never thought I'd be here. But here I am, shattered, broken, and utterly alone. The silence in the house was deafening after he left. At first, I just sat there, numb, not able to process what had happened. My mind felt disconnected from my body, floating in some strange limbo where nothing made sense anymore. The clock on the wall ticked in slow motion, marking the minutes, but I barely noticed the passage of time. I didn't cry. Not at first. I think I was too shocked, too hollow to even feel the weight of my own devastation. Instead, I sat there, staring at the front door where he had walked out, the door that I slammed shut behind him with every ounce of strength I had left. But then it hit me, the reality, the betrayal, the loss. It was like someone had reached inside my chest and twisted my heart until it shattered. The tears came all at once, a flood of grief and rage and disbelief that I couldn't control. I curled up on the floor, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. My body shook with each breath, and the pain inside me felt like it might rip me apart. This wasn't supposed to happen to me. I wasn't supposed to be the woman whose husband cheats on her with her best friend. Lauren. The name felt like poison in my mouth now, a word I couldn't even think without feeling sick. How could she do this to me? How could he? I tried to make sense of it. I replayed every moment, every conversation, every time we'd all hung out together, wondering how I could have been so blind. All those times I invited her over for dinner, all those double dates we went on together. It was all a lie. I was the fool, the one who trusted too much, the one who didn't see what was right in front of her. I don't know how long I stayed there on the floor, but by the time I forced myself to stand, it was dark outside. My tears had dried, leaving my face sticky and tight, and my head throbbed from all the crying. The house felt colder now, emptier, like it wasn't even mine anymore. Everything inside it had been touched by their betrayal, every object a reminder of what I had lost. I walked into the kitchen, needing something, anything to ground me. The sink was full of dirty dishes from dinner the night before, a mundane sight that felt so out of place in the chaos of my emotions. I grabbed a dishcloth and started scrubbing, my hands moving on autopilot as my mind spiraled. How did we get here? I couldn't stop thinking about all the times I'd confided in Lauren about my marriage, about him. The fights we had, the moments when I felt insecure or uncertain, the doubts I'd shared with her. And all that time, she was sleeping with him. She was listening to me talk about him, and then going behind my back to be with him. It made me feel sick to my stomach. I slammed a plate down into the sink, the sound echoing in the empty house. My anger was rising now, bubbling up from somewhere deep inside me. How dare they? How dare they take something as sacred as our friendship, as my marriage, and turn it into this? How dare they destroy everything I thought was real? I needed to confront her. I had to. I couldn't let this go. Couldn't let her think that she could get away with this without facing me. I grabbed my phone and typed out a message with shaking hands. We need to talk. It was short, simple, and cold. I didn't want to give her any more than that. I didn't want her to have the satisfaction of knowing how much she had hurt me, how much she had destroyed. Not yet. Not until I saw her face and made her explain why. A part of me knew that whatever she said wouldn't be enough, that no explanation would ever heal the wound she had left in my heart. But I needed to hear it. I needed to hear her admit it. I stared at my phone, waiting for a reply, the seconds dragging out like hours. When the 3 little dots appeared, my breath caught in my throat. I could almost see her sitting in her apartment, reading my message, feeling the weight of what she had done. The dots disappeared for a moment, then came back, as if she was struggling to find the right words. Okay, tomorrow, as if it was just some casual meeting between friends, as if she hadn't torn my life apart. I wanted to scream at her through the phone, tell her she didn't deserve to wait until tomorrow, that she needed to face me right now. But I didn't. Instead, I replied with a simple, cold fine, and put my phone down. Tomorrow. I could wait one more night. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face her anyway. Not yet. Not when I could still feel the anger pulsing through me, when I still wasn't sure if I would be able to hold it together in front of her. I went to bed that night, but sleep didn't come. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying everything over and over. The betrayal, the lies, the way she smiled at me just days ago, like nothing was wrong. How long had she been faking it? How long had she been pretending to be my friend while sneaking around with my husband? The hours crawled by, and every minute felt like another layer of my life being peeled away, leaving me raw and exposed. By the time the sun started to rise, I felt like I had nothing left. I was empty, hollow, but I was ready to face her. The next day, I found myself standing outside her apartment, my hands clenched in a fist by my sides. I could feel the tension building in my chest, the anger and hurt and disbelief all swirling together into something I couldn't quite control. I knocked on the door, harder than I needed to, my heart pounding as I waited for her to open it. When the door finally swung open, there she was, Lauren, my best friend, looking pale and anxious, like she knew what was coming but wasn't ready for it. "Hi," she said, her voice small and hesitant. "Let me in," I demanded, not caring how cold I sounded. I didn't come here to be polite. I came here for answers. She stepped aside, and I walked into the apartment that I had been in so many times before. It looked the same as always, cozy, familiar, but now it felt foreign, tainted by everything I knew. I turned to face her, crossing my arms over my chest as I waited for her to speak. She didn't. She just stood there, wringing her hands together, her eyes avoiding mine. "How could you?" I finally said, my voice trembling with the weight of my emotions. "How could you do this to me?" She flinched at my words like they physically hurt her. Good. I wanted her to feel every ounce of pain she had caused me. She started, but I cut her off. "Don't give me excuses, Lauren. Just tell me why. Tell me how long you've been lying to my face, pretending to be my friend while sleeping with my husband." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. She didn't get to cry. Not after what she had done. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just what?" I snapped. "It just happened? Is that supposed to make this okay? Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "No, I know it's not. I know I hurt you, and I'm so sorry." Her apology sounded hollow, like she was just saying what she thought I wanted to hear. But it wasn't enough. Nothing she said would ever be enough. "How long?" I asked again, my voice harder now. I needed to know the truth. All of it. 6 months, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "It's been going on for 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of sneaking around behind my back. Half a year of my life that was nothing but a facade." I felt my stomach twist, the bile rising in my throat. I had thought hearing her say it would give me some sense of closure, some finality, but all it did was rip the wound open wider. "Why?" I asked, my voice cracking now, the tears I had been holding back starting to blur my vision. "Why him? Why my husband?" She looked down at the floor, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her guilt was finally crashing down on her. "I don't know," she said softly. "I don't have a good reason. I was lonely. We were both lonely, I guess. One thing led to another, and it just happened." Her words were like a slap in the face. Loneliness? That's what she was going to blame this on? As if that somehow justified betraying me in the worst possible way? I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't stand the sight of her, the sound of her pathetic excuses. I turned on my heel and headed for the door, not bothering to say another word. There was nothing left to say. As I slammed the door behind me, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. For the first time since discovering the affair, I felt like I was finally letting go. Not of the pain. It would take a long time for that to heal, but of the need for answers, for closure. Because there was no closure to be had. They had both betrayed me, and no amount of apologies or explanations would ever make that okay. The door slammed behind me, and the echo of it lingered in the hallway like a final punctuation to the part of my life that was now over. I walked quickly down the stairs, out into the street, the cold air hitting my face and making me realize just how shaky I was. My legs felt weak, but I pushed forward, away from her apartment, away from the mess I didn't want to see anymore. I needed air. I needed space. Most of all, I needed to figure out who I was now that everything had crumbled around me. Walking aimlessly, I didn't even care where I was going. My feet carried me through the streets, past people who had no idea that my life had just been shattered. The world was still spinning for them. But for me, it felt like I was stuck in this slow-motion nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I wandered for hours, my thoughts swirling between anger, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. It was like I was trapped in a storm, every emotion crashing into me at once. How do you even begin to rebuild after something like this? How do you move forward when the people you trusted most have destroyed everything? At some point, I found myself at the park where we used to come together. My husband and I had picnicked here, taken long walks, and even talked about bringing our future kids to this very place. That life felt so far away now, so distant and foreign, like it belonged to someone else. I sank down onto a bench, staring out at the pond where the ducks were lazily drifting. I used to love this place. Now it was just another reminder of what I had lost. I closed my eyes and let the tears come again, this time softer, more resigned. I had cried so much over the past few days that I wasn't even sure I had any tears left, but they kept coming anyway, silently, without the sobs that had racked my body earlier. It felt like everything I believed in was gone. The trust I'd had in my husband, the friendship I'd built with Lauren, even the certainty I had in my own judgment. I was angry at myself for not seeing it sooner, for not questioning the signs that were right in front of me. Maybe I'd been in denial, too scared to face the truth because it would mean admitting that my perfect life wasn't so perfect after all. But now, there was no more pretending. There was only the harsh reality, and I had no idea what to do with it. The days after the confrontation blurred together in a haze of anger, grief, and moments of numbness that made everything feel like it was happening to someone else. I went through the motions, work, home, sleep, but nothing felt real anymore. I barely talked to anyone, isolating myself from the world because I didn't know how to explain what had happened without breaking down completely. Lauren tried to reach out a few times. I saw her messages pop up on my phone, each one more desperate than the last, but I didn't respond. I couldn't. The thought of talking to her, of hearing her voice, made my skin crawl. She was no longer the friend I thought I knew. She was the woman who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. My husband hadn't called. I wasn't sure if that was better or worse. Part of me wanted him to try, to at least make an effort to explain himself, but the other part of me knew that hearing from him would just reopen the wound I was barely keeping together. So I let the silence sit between us, a wall that neither of us seemed willing to break. I kept telling myself that I was fine, that I didn't need either of them to move on, but the truth was I was lost. I didn't know how to navigate a world where my closest relationships were destroyed. I didn't know who I was without them. One evening, nearly a week after I confronted Lauren, I found myself sitting in front of my laptop, aimlessly scrolling through old photos. I hadn't meant to torture myself, but somehow I ended up in the folder from our last vacation, the one we'd taken just a few months ago. There we were, smiling at the camera, holding hands on the beach, laughing like we didn't have a care in the world. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening as I looked at the version of myself who had no idea what was coming. I looked so happy, so content, and now that happiness felt like a cruel joke. I wasn't that person anymore. I didn't even know who I was now. Suddenly, I felt an overwhelming urge to delete everything. Every photo, every memory, every trace of a life I thought I had. It felt like the only way to take control, to erase the parts of my life that had been built on lies. My fingers hovered over the delete button, ready to wipe it all away. But then I stopped. Deleting the photos wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't erase the betrayal or make the pain go away. It wouldn't fix what was broken. I closed the laptop, pushing it away from me like it was something dangerous. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready to face the reality of what had happened, let alone try to move past it. But I couldn't avoid it forever. I had to figure out what came next. I had to find a way to heal, even if I didn't know how. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. It wasn't that the pain had lessened or that I'd magically found the strength to move on, but something had shifted inside me, like a small part of me had accepted that I couldn't do this alone. I needed help. I needed to talk to someone who could help me make sense of all of this. It took a lot of courage to admit that to myself and to someone else. I'd always prided myself on being strong, independent, able to handle whatever life threw at me. But this was different. This was a pain I couldn't carry on my own anymore. I thought about calling my sister, but she lived across the country, and I didn't want to burden her with my problems, especially when she had her own life to worry about. My parents were out of the question. They wouldn't understand. And most of my other friends, well, I didn't want to get into the whole ugly mess with them just yet. But there was one person who came to mind, Megan. She wasn't my closest friend, but we'd always had a solid connection. She was kind, empathetic, and had been through her own fair share of heartbreak. If anyone would understand, it was her. I found her number and dialed it before I could second-guess myself. The phone rang a few times, and I almost hung up, but then her voice came through the line. "Hey, it's been a while," she said, her tone warm and inviting. "Hey," I replied, my voice sounding more fragile than I expected. I need to talk to you." She must have heard something in my voice because her tone immediately shifted to concern. "Of course. What's going on? Are you okay?" I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to begin, but then the words started spilling out everything. The affair, the betrayal, the confrontation with Lauren, the silence from my husband. By the time I finished, I felt raw and exposed, like I had just relived the whole nightmare all over again. "Oh my God," Megan whispered. I don't even know what to say. "I'm so sorry. That's awful." I could hear the genuine empathy in her voice, and for the first time since it all happened, I felt a small sense of relief. Someone else knew. I wasn't carrying this burden alone anymore. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I don't even know how to begin moving forward." "You don't have to know right now," she said gently. "You're going through something really traumatic, and it's okay to not have all the answers. But you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here for you, whatever you need." Her words were exactly what I needed to hear. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew one thing. I wasn't alone in this anymore. There were people who cared about me, people who would help me find my way through the darkness. The days that followed weren't easy. Healing wasn't some magical process that happened overnight. It was messy, painful, and slow. Some days I felt like I was making progress, like I could actually see a future without the weight of this betrayal dragging me down. But other days, I felt like I was right back at square one, lost in a sea of hurt and anger. Megan kept her promise. She checked in on me regularly, sometimes just to chat, other times to let me vent when the pain became too much. She didn't push me to move on too quickly or tell me how to feel. She just listened, and that was more valuable than I could have ever imagined. I also started seeing a therapist, something I never thought I'd do. But after everything that had happened, I knew I needed professional help to process the grief and betrayal that had been consuming me. The therapist helped me understand that it wasn't about erasing the pain or pretending it never happened. It was about finding a way to live with it, to let it shape me without letting it define me. Slowly, I started to rebuild my life. Little by little, I reclaimed the things that had once brought me joy, though they now felt different, colored by what had happened. I went back to my favorite cafe, the one I used to frequent with Lauren, and order my usual coffee. I returned to the gym, where I used to go with my husband, finding solace in the routine of exercising, even if the memories were still raw. But I also made new memories. I found new places to go, new people to connect with. I wasn't the same person I was before the betrayal, but I was still me. And I was determined to find out who I could become, despite everything. Months passed, and the rawness of the betrayal slowly began to dull, though it never completely disappeared. It became something I lived with, a scar that I had to accept as part of my story. It wasn't about forgetting, and it definitely wasn't about forgiving. Not yet, maybe not ever. But I learned how to function again, how to get through the day without feeling like the weight of what had happened was crushing me. I hadn't spoken to my husband since the day he left. He never came back for his things, never called, never sent a message. It was as if he had disappeared completely from my life, leaving behind nothing but the broken pieces. Maybe that was his way of dealing with the guilt, or maybe he just didn't care enough to face the aftermath. Either way, the silence became part of my healing. I realized I didn't want to hear from him. I didn't need his explanations or apologies. They wouldn't change anything. Lauren, on the other hand, didn't give up as easily. She tried calling, texting, even leaving messages on social media, asking to meet up, to explain. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. I didn't want her version of the story, her justifications. There was nothing she could say that would undo the hurt she had caused. One day, about 4 months after the confrontation, I came home from work to find a letter in my mailbox. No name, no return address, but I knew immediately who it was from. The handwriting was unmistakable, Lauren's. I stood there for a long time, staring at the envelope, debating whether or not to open it. Part of me didn't want to. I didn't owe her anything. I could rip it up and throw it away, continue on with my life without ever knowing what she had to say. But another part of me, the part that was still trying to make sense of everything, needed closure. I took the letter inside and sat down at the kitchen table, my hands trembling slightly as I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, her words scrawled across it in that familiar handwriting that once brought me comfort, but now only stirred feelings of resentment and pain. Dear Emily, I don't know where to start, and I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to say this. I need to try to explain, even if you never forgive me. I'm sorry. Those words feel so inadequate for what I've done, but they're all I have. I'm sorry I betrayed you, hurt you, and ruined our friendship. I'm sorry I let things go as far as they did, and I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to stop it sooner. I don't expect you to understand or to forgive me, but I want you to know that what happened with Jack was never about you. It was never because you weren't enough or because you did something wrong. It was about me. I was going through a dark time, feeling lost and disconnected from my own life. And instead of dealing with that in a healthy way, I made the worst decision of my life. I let myself get pulled into something I should have never allowed. And I hurt the one person who mattered most to me. I know that no explanation can justify what I did, but I want you to know that I regret it more than anything. Losing your friendship has been the hardest thing I've ever gone through, and I'll carry that guilt with me forever. I hope you're healing, and I hope you find happiness again. You deserve so much better than what I gave you, and I'm truly sorry for everything. Lauren, asterisk. I stared at the letter, my heart pounding as I reread her words over and over. It wasn't what I expected. I had prepared myself for excuses, for more lies. But there was none of that. Just an apology, a genuine one, as far as I could tell. And yet, despite her words, I didn't feel the relief I thought I might. There was no closure in her apology, no sudden sense of peace. The pain was still there, still raw, still festering beneath the surface. Because her letter didn't change what had happened. It didn't undo the months of betrayal or the fact that she had broken my trust in the most unforgivable way. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't keep it out where I could see it, either. I tucked it in the drawer of my desk, not sure if I'd ever look at it again. Time kept moving forward, as it always does, dragging me along with it whether I was ready or not. Slowly, I found myself focusing more on the future than the past. It wasn't easy. Some days, I still woke up with that familiar ache in my chest, the reminder of all I had lost. But those days became fewer and farther between. I was learning how to live with the pain, how to carry it without letting it weigh me down. One evening, after another long day at work, I decided to go out for a walk. It was something I hadn't done in a while, at least not since everything had happened. I used to love walking through the neighborhood, the quiet streets lined with trees, the fresh air clearing my mind. It was something simple, something grounding. As I walked, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The sun was setting, casting a golden light across the houses, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Maybe it wasn't complete peace. I wasn't naive enough to think I was fully healed, but it was a step in the right direction. I stopped at a small cafe, one I had passed by many times, but never ventured into. It had a cozy, welcoming vibe, The kind of place where you could lose yourself in a book or a conversation. I ordered a cup of coffee and found a table near the window, watching as the world moved around me. It was there in that moment of quiet reflection that I realized something important. I had been so focused on what I had lost, my marriage, my friendship, the life I thought I knew, that I hadn't allowed myself to think about what I had gained. Strength, resilience, the ability to stand on my own, even when everything around me had crumbled. I wasn't the same person I had been before the betrayal, but that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I had been forced to grow, to confront parts of myself I didn't want to see, to find a new path forward. And while the journey had been painful, it had also shown me that I was capable of surviving even the worst heartbreak. As I sipped my coffee, I felt a small smile tug at the corners of my lips. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Hopeful for the future, for whatever it held. I didn't know where my life was headed, but I knew one thing for sure. I was stronger now. Strong enough to face whatever came next. A few weeks later, as I was settling into my new routine, something unexpected happened. I was at the grocery store, minding my own business, when I saw him. Jack, my husband. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. I hadn't seen him since the day he left, and now, here he was standing in the same aisle as me, looking just as shocked as I felt. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between us like an invisible barrier. He looked different, older maybe, or just more tired. His hair was a little longer, his clothes more casual than I remembered. But it was still him, the man I had once loved, the man who had shattered my world. Emily, he said, his voice soft, hesitant. I didn't know what to say. My mind raced, trying to process the sudden rush of emotions. Anger, hurt, confusion, even a twinge of sadness. I had spent so long imagining what it would be like to see him again, and now that it was happening, I wasn't prepared. What are you doing here? I finally asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He glanced down at the groceries in his cart, then back at me. I moved back. A few weeks ago. Moved back. I hadn't even known he'd left town. A part of me wondered where he had gone, what his life had been like since he walked out the door that day. But another part of me didn't care. He had made his choice, and I had made mine. Why? I asked, folding my arms across my chest, trying to maintain some sense of control over the situation. I don't know, he admitted, his eyes filled with guilt. I don't know what I thought. I just needed to get away. I nodded, understanding in some small way. After all, I had wanted to escape too. But while he ran, I had stayed. I had faced the mess he left behind. I'm sorry, Emily, he said, his voice thick with emotion. For everything. I know I can't fix it, but I needed you to know that I'm sorry. I studied him for a moment, searching his face for sincerity. He looked genuine, remorseful even, but it didn't matter anymore. His apology, like Lauren's, couldn't change what had happened. It couldn't erase the months of betrayal or the pain I had endured. I don't need your apology, I said quietly, my voice steady. I've already moved on. You should too. His face fell, and for a brief moment, I saw the man I used to love, the man I had built a life with. But that life was gone now, and so was the version of him I had once believed in. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in the grocery store aisle, just another ghost from a past I was finally ready to leave behind. Walking away from Jack in that grocery store felt like the final break I hadn't known I needed. As I left him standing there, a strange sense of relief washed over me, as if some invisible weight had finally lifted. For months, I'd carried the burden of his betrayal, the pain of what he and Lauren had done to me. I'd been haunted by the ghost of our marriage, by the what-ifs and the shattered dreams. But now, seeing him again, standing there apologizing, it became clear. I didn't need his forgiveness, and I didn't need him to heal. I had been waiting for something, though I didn't realize it until that moment. Waiting for him to come back, for him to explain, or maybe just for closure. But standing face to face with him, I understood that closure wasn't something he could give me. It wasn't something anyone could give me. It was something I had to find on my own, and as I walked away, I felt that I was finally, truly ready to let go. That evening, I I returned home to my quiet apartment. I poured myself a glass of wine, curled up on the couch, and stared out the window at the city below. The world kept moving, as it always did, but for the first time in a long time, I felt still, calm, at peace. The turbulence that had defined my life for so long was finally beginning to settle. I thought about calling Megan, telling her about the encounter with Jack, but I decided against it. This moment was for me, not for anyone else. I'd tell her eventually, of course. She'd been my rock through all of this, and she'd want to know. But tonight, I needed to sit with my thoughts, with my feelings, and acknowledge the shift that had just taken place inside me. I had changed. I had grown. And most importantly, I had survived. The weeks that followed were different. There was a lightness in my step, a renewed sense of purpose in everything I did. It wasn't that the pain was completely gone. Grief, especially over betrayal, doesn't just disappear. But I was learning to live alongside it, to let it be part of my story without letting it control me. I started to reclaim parts of my life that I had lost. I redecorated the apartment, making it fully mine in ways I hadn't before. I threw out old reminders of the life I had shared with Jack and filled the space with new memories, new colors, new energy. I even started picking up hobbies I had once loved but had let slip away during the chaos of my marriage. Painting, running, cooking elaborate meals just for myself. It felt good, rediscovering who I was without the shadow of someone else hovering over me. Megan noticed the change in me. And one evening, over drinks, she finally asked, "What's different? You seem lighter, happier." I smiled, swirling the wine in my glass before answering. "I think I'm finally letting go," I said. "Of all of it. Of him, of her, of the pain. It's not gone, but I don't feel like it controls me anymore." Megan smiled warmly, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm so proud of you, Emily. You've been through hell, and you came out stronger." Her words meant more to me than I could express. She had seen me at my worst, at my most broken, and now she was witnessing me rebuild. It felt good to be acknowledged, to have someone else recognize the strength I had found within myself. "I never thought I'd get here," I admitted, my voice softer. "But now that I am, it feels like I can finally breathe again." And it was true. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. One Saturday afternoon, just as I was settling into the comfort of my new normal, I received an unexpected message. It was from Lauren. Seeing her name flash across my phone still made my stomach twist, though the sharp pain that used to accompany it had faded over time. I debated for a long moment before opening the message. "Hey, I know it's been a while, but I just wanted to reach out one last time. I understand if you don't want to respond, but I'm hoping we could meet, just once more. I don't want anything from you, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need to talk. Please, Emily, if you can find it in your heart to give me this one chance, I'd be grateful. If not, I understand, and I won't bother you again." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I thought I had moved past the need for any more conversations with her, for any more explanations. But something in her message tugged at me. Maybe it was the finality of it. The idea that this could truly be the last time we'd ever speak. Or maybe it was the fact that, deep down, some part of me still wanted answers. Against my better judgment, I found myself typing a reply. "Okay, one last time. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town, far from the places we used to go together. It felt safer that way, more neutral, less charged with memories of the past. When I walked in, I saw her immediately. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the weight of her guilt had shrunk her somehow. Her eyes were downcast, her fingers nervously fidgeting with the edge of her cup. When she saw me, she stood up quickly, her face a mixture of hope and fear. "Emily," she said softly, almost hesitantly, as if she didn't quite believe I had actually shown up. I nodded, not quite ready to speak yet. I sat down across from her, folding my hands in my lap and waiting for her to begin. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them together on the table. "I didn't think you'd come," she admitted. "Thank you for giving me this chance. I know I don't deserve it." I stayed silent, my gaze steady. I was here for one reason, to listen, not to give her any more than that. I've thought about you every day since it all happened, she continued, her voice shaky but sincere. I've thought about what I did and how I ruined the best thing in my life, our friendship. I can't go back and change it, but I need you to know that I regret it. Every single day, I regret it. She paused, her eyes filling with tears. I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, but I'm not just sorry for the affair. I'm sorry for how I treated you, for how I took advantage of your trust, for how I didn't value our friendship the way I should have. Her words hung in the air, and I felt the familiar sting of old wounds. But this time, the pain didn't overwhelm me. I had healed enough to hear her, without letting it tear me apart. Why now? I finally asked, my voice quiet. Why reach out again? Lauren wiped at her eyes, her voice thick with emotion. Because I needed you to know that losing you was the hardest thing I've ever gone through. And I'm not asking for anything, not forgiveness, not friendship, but I couldn't leave things the way they were. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw the depth of her remorse. She wasn't asking for redemption. She was asking for peace. And in that moment, I realized I had already found my own peace. Meeting her here, listening to her apology, it wasn't about absolving her or letting her back into my life. It was about closing this chapter for good for both of us. I appreciate you saying that, I said, my voice steady. But I've moved on. I've found my way without you. And while I can't forget what you did, I can let go of the anger. I don't need it anymore. Lauren nodded, tears streaming down her face, but there was a look of relief in her eyes. She understood. This wasn't about forgiveness. It was about closure. We sat in silence for a moment, and then I stood up, ready to leave. Goodbye, Lauren, I said softly, offering her a small, final smile. Goodbye, Emily, she whispered, watching as I walked away. As I left the cafe, I felt a strange sense of lightness. The final thread of my past had been cut, and now, for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from the betrayal, free from the hurt, free to fully embrace the future that lay ahead of me. I didn't know what that future held, but I knew one thing. I was ready for it. As I walked away from the cafe, I felt a new kind of stillness settle over me. A quiet but powerful realization that I had closed the door on one chapter of my life and was finally stepping into another. It wasn't a sudden burst of happiness or relief. It was more like the gentle unfurling of something that had been bound up tight for so long. A soft release of tension I hadn't even realized I was still holding. I went home that evening, sat down with a cup of tea, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to revisit the past. I didn't feel the pull of old memories, of the people who had hurt me, or the life I had lost. Instead, I felt a quiet anticipation, a curiosity about what might come next. I began to settle into the rhythm of my new life. Work kept me busy, and I found solace in the little routines I had created for myself. Weekend hikes, coffee at the small cafe I'd come to love, quiet evenings with a good book. The simplicity of it all felt right. It felt like healing. Megan remained my closest confidant, but I also found myself opening up to new friendships. I started joining a few social groups, pushing myself to meet new people, and it surprised me how much I enjoyed it. I hadn't realized how isolated I had become, how much I had closed myself off from the world after everything had happened. But now, I was ready to reconnect. And then one day, something unexpected happened. Someone unexpected. It was a Friday evening, and I had just finished a long week at work. I decided to stop by my favorite cafe for a quick bite to eat before heading home. The place was busy, as it usually was on a Friday night, filled with people chatting and laughing over drinks. I liked the noise, the hum of life all around me. It made me feel like part of something again. I found a small table by the window and sat down with my coffee and a sandwich, content to watch the world go by for a while. I was lost in my thoughts when I heard someone clear their throat nearby. "Excuse me," a voice said, hesitant but warm. "Is this seat taken?" I looked up and found myself staring into the eyes of a man I had never seen before. He was tall, with dark hair that was slightly tousled, and there was a kindness in his eyes that caught me off guard. He was holding a cup of coffee, and from the way he glanced around the crowded cafe, I could tell he was just looking for a place to sit. I hesitated for a moment, still not used to letting new people into my space, but something about him put me at ease. I nodded. "No, go ahead." He smiled, grateful, and slid into the seat across from me. "Thanks. It's packed in here tonight." "Yeah, it's always like this on Fridays," I said, taking a sip of my coffee, suddenly feeling a little awkward. I wasn't used to making small talk with strangers. He took a sip of his coffee too, glancing out the window for a moment before turning back to me. "Do you come here often?" I nodded. "It's kind of my go-to spot." "What about you?" "First time," he said with a grin. "I just moved to the area a few weeks ago. Still figuring out where all the good places are." "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said, smiling a little. "This place is a good start." We talked for a while, just casual conversation. Where he was from, what he did for work, the usual pleasantries. His name was David, and he worked in finance, recently relocated from Chicago for a new job. He had an easygoing demeanor, and as we talked, I found myself relaxing, the awkwardness fading away. It wasn't like there was an instant spark, not the kind you read about in novels. But there was something there, a quiet connection, a sense of comfort I hadn't expected. By the time we finished our coffees, I realized I didn't want the conversation to end. "So," he said, standing up and grabbing his coat, "if you ever feel like giving a guy a tour of the local spots, I'd love to take you up on that." He smiled, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flutter of excitement. It wasn't the overwhelming rush of emotion I had once chased, but a steady, grounded feeling. I liked it. "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself. David handed me his phone, and I typed in my number. As I gave it back to him, he smiled again, his eyes warm. "Great. I'll give you a call soon." And with that, he left, leaving me sitting there with a strange mix of emotions. I hadn't expected to meet someone, to feel the stirrings of interest again. I had spent so long healing, building my life back up from the ruins, that I hadn't even thought about the possibility of starting something new. But now it was there, an opening, a possibility. David called me a few days later, and we set up a time to meet for dinner. I was nervous, more nervous than I expected to be. I hadn't been on a real date since Jack. And that had been years ago, back when I was still the version of myself who believed in happy endings and lifelong promises. I didn't know what to expect from this date. Part of me wondered if I was ready. Was it too soon? Had I really moved on from everything? Or was I just pretending to be okay? But another part of me, the part that had survived the worst of the heartbreak, whispered that I deserved this. That I deserved to see what was out there, to explore the possibility of something new, something better. We met at a small Italian restaurant, the kind of cozy, intimate place where you could actually hear the person you were talking to. David was already there when I arrived, waiting outside with a smile that put me at ease almost instantly. The dinner was easy. That's the best way I can describe it. There were no awkward silences, no uncomfortable moments. We talked about everything and nothing, our favorite movies, travel, books we were reading. He made me laugh, and I realized I hadn't laughed like that in a long time. It felt good, natural, like slipping into something familiar, yet new at the same time. As the evening went on, I found myself letting my guard down, opening up in ways I hadn't expected. I told him about my work, about my love for hiking and painting. I even told him a little about my past. Not the whole story, but enough for him to understand that I had been through something difficult. He didn't push for details, didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. He just listened, and that meant more to me than anything. By the time we finished dinner, I felt lighter, like I had taken another step forward without even realizing it. As David and I continued to see each other, something shifted inside me. It was subtle at first, just the simple act of enjoying his company, of looking forward to our time together. But as our connection deepened, so did my fears. I had been hurt before, betrayed in ways that had cut me so deeply I wasn't sure I'd ever fully recover. And now, here I was, opening myself up to the possibility of love again. It was terrifying. One night, after we had been seeing each other for a few months, I found myself lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, overwhelmed by doubt. What if he wasn't who he seemed? What if, like Jack, he betrayed me? Could I survive that kind of heartbreak again? The walls I had built around my heart were still there, strong and impenetrable, even as I tried to let them down. I wanted to trust David, But my past haunted me, whispered in my ear that trust was dangerous, that vulnerability only led to pain. But then I remembered something my therapist had told me. Healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning to carry it with you without letting it define you. I could feel the weight of my past, of the betrayal, the loss, but I didn't have to let it control me. I could choose to move forward, to trust again, even if it scared me, even if it meant risking my heart once more. The next time I saw David, I could feel the tension inside me, a mix of fear and hope, of wanting to protect myself but also wanted to let him in. We met for dinner again at a cozy little spot downtown. As we talked, laughed, and shared stories about our week, I felt the warmth of his presence and the genuine care in his eyes. He made me feel safe, even in my moments of doubt. But that safety was exactly what scared me most. I kept waiting for the catch, for the moment when the illusion would shatter and I'd discover that he wasn't who I thought he was. I had trusted Jack once, just as deeply, and he had turned out to be someone I didn't know at all. How could I trust David wouldn't do the same? When the meal ended, we took a walk through the quiet streets. It was late, and the city felt calm, like it belonged to just us. David reached for my hand, and for the first time, I didn't pull away. His fingers intertwined with mine, and I squeezed back, allowing myself to be present, even if part of me still hesitated. At the end of the night, standing outside my apartment, I knew I had to say something. I couldn't keep going like this, half in, half out, too scared to fully embrace what was in front of me. If there was any chance for us to be more than just a fleeting connection, I needed to be honest with him about what was holding me back. David, I began, my voice soft. There's something I need to tell you. He looked at me, his expression open and understanding, the way it always was when we talked. What is it? He asked gently. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I've been struggling, I admitted, with trusting again, with letting myself believe that something real could happen between us. He didn't say anything right away, just watched me, giving me the space to find the right words. I've been hurt before, I continued, feeling the familiar knot of pain tighten in my chest. Badly. And it's been hard to trust anyone after that. Even you. And it's not because of anything you've done, but because of what happened to me. I stopped, swallowing hard as the memories of Jack and Lauren came rushing back. I didn't want to cry. Not now, not here. I had cried enough tears over the past, over people who didn't deserve them. But David didn't rush me. He stood there, his hand still holding mine, waiting. I was betrayed. I finally said, the words escaping me in a whisper. By my husband and my best friend. They were together behind my back for months. And when I found out, it shattered me. I didn't think I'd ever be able to trust again. I didn't even think I'd ever want to try again. I let out a shaky breath, feeling lighter for having said it, but still afraid of what he might think. I braced myself for his reaction, half expecting him to pull away, to decide that I was too broken, too damaged for him to deal with. But instead, David did something I hadn't expected. He stepped closer, his hand cupping my cheek as he looked into my eyes, his voice soft but steady. I'm so sorry you went through that, he said. I can't imagine how much that must have hurt. But I want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. I understand why you're scared, Emily, and I'm not going to rush you. We'll take this at whatever pace you need. But I want you to know, I'm not him, and I'm not going to hurt you. His words hit me like a wave, crashing through the walls I had built up. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be different. That maybe I could trust again. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment, the emotions too overwhelming. But I didn't need to say anything. He already knew. I like you. I finally whispered, the words feeling small but true. I really like you, David. I need time. I need to take this slowly. He smiled, his thumb brushing gently over my cheek. That's all I'm asking for, he said. Time. We have all the time in the world. Over the next few weeks, I let myself lean into the possibility of something real with David. We continued to spend time together, but I allowed myself to be more open, more vulnerable. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the fear crept back in, when old doubts resurfaced, and I questioned whether I was making a mistake. But every time that happened, David was there, patient and steady, reminding me that trust didn't have to be an all-or-nothing leap. We took things slowly, just as we had agreed. There were no grand declarations, no rushing into something I wasn't ready for. Instead, we built our relationship brick by brick, each conversation, each laugh, each shared moment adding another layer of trust. It felt natural, easy, something I hadn't expected after the wreckage of my past. I found myself looking forward to our time together, not just because I enjoyed being around him, but because I felt safe with him. He never pressured me, never made me feel like I had to be more than I was ready to be. He accepted me, baggage, scars, and all. One night, as we sat on my couch watching a movie, I found myself resting my head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his presence next to me. It was such a simple thing, but it felt like a huge step. Allowing myself to be close to someone again, to trust that this time, it wouldn't end in heartbreak. David sensed the shift in me, but he didn't say anything. He just slipped his arm around me, holding me gently as we sat there in the quiet of the evening. And for the first time, I felt like I could breathe, like maybe I didn't have to hold on to the fear anymore. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some old boxes in my closet, I came across a photo album from my wedding with Jack. I hadn't opened it in over a year, hadn't even thought about it since everything fell apart. But now, holding it in my hands, I felt a strange pull to look inside. Not to revisit the pain, but to face it, to let it go. I sat down on the floor and opened the album, flipping through the pages filled with smiling faces and happy moments that now felt like they belonged to someone else. There I was in my white dress, laughing with Jack, surrounded by friends and family. It was a beautiful day, filled with promises that were never kept. As I turned each page, I didn't feel the sharp sting of betrayal that I once had. Instead, I felt a quiet sadness, a sense of loss for what could have been. But I also felt something else, gratitude. Gratitude that I had survived it, that I had come out on the other side stronger, more resilient. When I reached the end of the album, I closed it softly, setting it aside. It didn't belong in my life anymore, but I didn't need to destroy it either. It was part of my story, a chapter that had ended, but one that had shaped me into who I was now. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. The ghosts of my past were still there, but they no longer haunted me. I had faced them, and now, I was ready to move forward. The weeks rolled by, and life began to feel different, lighter, more vibrant. With each day that passed, the weight of the past felt less and less suffocating. The shadows of betrayal that had once loomed over everything I did were now faint, distant. It was as if they no longer had the power to define me. I had chosen to rebuild my life, not around the pain, but around the possibility of healing, of something new. And that something new was David. One evening, we decided to have dinner at my place. It had become a quiet ritual of ours, simple meals, soft music playing in the background, and the comfort of each other's company. As we sat across from each other at the kitchen table, laughing about something small and unimportant, I realized how different this felt from the life I had known before. This wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about quiet, steady warmth. David never tried to sweep me off my feet with promises of a perfect future. He just showed up day after day with kindness, patience, and honesty. He became the foundation I didn't know I needed. After dinner, we found ourselves on the couch again, talking about everything and nothing. There was a sense of ease between us now, a closeness that I hadn't expected to feel so soon, but which felt undeniably right. At some point, the conversation lulled, and I turned to him, the soft glow of the lamp casting a warm light across his face. I didn't know what had shifted inside me, but I suddenly felt ready. Ready to let go of the final piece of fear I'd been holding on to. Ready to embrace the possibility of love again. David, I said softly, catching his attention. He turned to me, his eyes searching mine with quiet curiosity. I've been thinking, I continued, feeling my heart beat a little faster. About us. About what this is, what it could be. He didn't interrupt, just waited, his hand gently resting on mine. I'm ready, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. I'm ready to let you in. Fully. I don't want to hold back anymore. David's face softened into a smile, one filled with understanding and warmth. Emily, he said, his voice low and full of affection. I've been waiting for you to say that. But I never wanted to rush you. I'm here for the long haul, however long you need. His words hit me with a wave of emotion, and I realized how different this was from anything I had ever known. This wasn't a whirlwind romance, driven by passion or intensity. This was steady, patient, and real. It was love, but a love that had been built slowly, brick by brick, and I was finally ready to let myself feel it. I love you, I whispered, the words coming out quietly, but with certainty. It was the first time I'd said it to anyone since Jack, and for a moment, I held my breath, waiting for the fear to creep back in. But it didn't. Instead, I felt free. David's smile widened, his eyes bright with emotion. I love you too, Emily, he said, his voice full of sincerity. He reached up, brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear. And I'll keep loving you, no matter what comes next. There was no rush, no urgency. Just the two of us, sitting there in the quiet of my living room, sharing something that had been growing slowly and carefully between us. I leaned in, pressing my forehead to his, feeling the warmth of his skin, the softness of his breath against mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt safe. As the months passed, my relationship with David continued to deepen. We found a rhythm together, one that was built on trust, patience, and understanding. The more I allowed myself to trust him, the more I realized that love didn't have to be complicated. It could be simple, steady, and strong. But with this new chapter in my life came the need to fully close the old one. One weekend, I decided it was time to clear out the last remnants of my past with Jack. I hadn't kept much, just a few mementos tucked away in a box in the closet, including that wedding album I had once thought I couldn't face. I pulled out the box and sat on the floor, ready to let go of what was left. As I sorted through the photos, the cards, and the little trinkets from our marriage, I didn't feel the sharp pain I once had. Instead, I felt a quiet acceptance. Jack had been part of my life, a big part, but he wasn't my life anymore. The love we had once shared was gone, and it was time to move forward without holding on to the memories of what could have been. With a sense of finality, I packed everything up and placed it in the trash. It wasn't an act of anger or bitterness. It was simply time to let go. David and I eventually moved in together, combining our lives in a way that felt natural and right. It wasn't rushed or impulsive. It was just the next step in a journey that we had been building carefully together. Every day, I found myself more grateful for what we had created, a relationship built on honesty, respect, and love. I no longer thought about Jack or Lauren. They were chapters that had shaped me, but they were no longer part of my story. I had made peace with the past, and in doing so, I had opened the door to a future I hadn't even imagined for myself. One evening, as David and I sat on our balcony, watching the sunset, I turned to him with a smile. I never thought I'd be here, I said softly. Where, he asked, turning to me with that familiar warmth in his eyes. Here, I said, gesturing around us. With someone I love, feeling happy, whole. He squeezed my hand gently. You deserve it, Emily. You deserve all the happiness in the world. And in that moment, I believed him. For the first time in a long time, I truly believed that I deserved the love I had found. Not just with David, but with myself. The journey had been painful, full of heartbreak and loss, but it had brought me here, to a place where I could finally be at peace with who I was and where my life was headed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I leaned into David, resting my head on his shoulder. The future was unknown, unpredictable. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I was ready for whatever came next, knowing that I had the strength to face it and the love to carry me through. And as I closed my eyes, I knew that this was only the beginning.